They say the greatest battles are never fought on the battlefield or in crowded arenas, but within the silent chambers of the human heart. Sometimes the fiercest wars unfold inside those who smile the most, those who give the most, and those who carry the weight of everyone else's happiness on their shoulders. What if kindness itself could become a prison? What if compassion, when left unchecked, could hollow out a soul until nothing was left but exhaustion and despair? That is where this story begins, with the kind of person who shines brightly for others but slowly burns themselves away in secret. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and father of analytical psychology, once described a pattern he observed in certain patients, people whose very sensitivity and empathy drove them into emotional ruin. He noticed how some individuals seemed destined to live in service of others, suppressing their own desires, needs, and identities in the process. At first glance, they looked like saints, endlessly generous and selfless. But beneath the surface, their lives told a different tale, one of anxiety, depression, and a haunting sense of emptiness. This paradox fascinated Jung because it revealed a hidden truth about human nature. Sometimes the qualities that make us most loved by others can also become the chains that quietly destroy us. Among the many patients Jung saw, there were countless variations of this theme, but the story I am about to share captures its essence in a way that feels almost universal. Imagine a young woman named Anna, whose life could have been mistaken for a fairy tale to anyone looking from the outside. She was admired in her community, adored by her family, and praised for her tireless willingness to help anyone in need. If a neighbor fell ill, Anna was the first at their door with food and medicine. If a friend lost their job, she would give them her own savings without hesitation. At work, she took on extra responsibilities, often covering for colleagues who left early or missed deadlines. To everyone around her, Anna was the embodiment of kindness and strength. But what no one saw were the long nights when Anna sat awake until 3 a.m., her body exhausted, but her mind racing with guilt. She replayed every moment of her day, wondering if she had done enough, if she had accidentally disappointed someone, if her worth was slipping away. She carried a silent belief that her value as a human being was tied entirely to her usefulness, that love was something to be earned by sacrifice, and that rest was indulgence she could never afford. Slowly, her health began to crack under the weight of this invisible burden. She developed headaches, her appetite vanished, and an undercurrent of sadness shadowed even her brightest smiles. Jung described this kind of suffering as a collapse of the persona, the mask each of us wears to face the world. For Anna, the mask was the helper, the one who always knew what others needed before they asked. Yet beneath this mask, her authentic self was crying out, suffocated and ignored. The more she clung to her persona, the more fragile it became until it threatened to shatter entirely. This is the strange danger of empathy when it grows unchecked. It does not simply connect us to others. It can erase us from ourselves. Anna's story is not unique. Perhaps you have known someone like her. Perhaps you have even lived her story in some small way. The unspoken pressure to always be reliable, always be giving, always be available, even when your own heart feels empty. The tragedy is that society often praises such behavior. People are quick to applaud the selfless and the tireless, without realizing that behind the applause stands a person slowly disappearing. Jung warned that this path, if left unexamined, can lead to a profound form of depression, a sense that one's life has no meaning apart from serving others. Yet within this darkness lies the seed of transformation. Jung believed that the suffering of people like Anna was not meaningless. Rather, it was the painful but necessary beginning of individuation, the process of becoming one's true self. To reach that point, however, required something terrifying for Anna. She would have to confront the parts of herself she had long buried. She would need to acknowledge her anger at being taken for granted, her resentment of endless sacrifice, her longing for freedom, and her fear that choosing herself would mean losing love. This inner journey is rarely gentle. It begins with cracks, moments when the mask slips, when exhaustion spills out in tears or bursts of frustration. Anna experienced this during a family gathering one evening when her younger brother, oblivious to how drained she was, asked her to handle all the preparations for a holiday celebration. For the first time, instead of smiling and agreeing, she snapped, "Why is it always me? Don't you see how tired I am?" The words shocked her family, but they terrified Anna even more. For years she had swallowed such feelings, convinced they were selfish and wrong. Now, spoken aloud, they felt both dangerous and strangely liberating. That was the moment the shadow surfaced, the hidden part of herself that carried anger, needs, and desires she had long denied. Jung taught that the shadow is not evil. It is simply the unacknowledged half of our being. To ignore it is to live only half a life. To embrace it is to begin healing. Anna did not yet know how to embrace hers. She only knew that something inside her had broken, and that she could no longer pretend everything was fine. Her journey into the hidden truth of success, the kind of success measured not by usefulness but by authenticity, was only beginning. Anna left that family gathering in silence, her words still echoing in her mind. The shock on her brother's face haunted her, not because she regretted speaking up, but because she realized how alien those words had felt in her own mouth. For years she had built her identity on being agreeable, dependable, endlessly giving. Now, for the first time, she had chosen honesty over harmony, and it both terrified and intrigued her. That night, lying awake at 2 a.m., she thought about the person she had become, someone who was loved by everyone, yet deeply unknown to herself. The next weeks were filled with small awakenings. Anna began to notice how often she said yes when every part of her wanted to say no. She realized she was the one people called when they needed a last-minute favor, the one who stayed late at work without recognition, the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries for others but spent her own alone. Each realization cut into her like a blade, forcing her to confront a question she had avoided for years. If I stopped giving, who would I be? Carl Jung once wrote that people do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For Anna, that darkness was the resentment she had suppressed for so long. It showed up as exhaustion, as bitterness, as the quiet voice whispering that her life was not her own. At first she resisted it, afraid that acknowledging her needs would make her selfish. But slowly she began to see that ignoring the shadow was what had kept her chained. One evening, Anna visited an old friend named Mara, someone she had not seen in years. Mara was different from most people Anna knew, direct, unapologetic, and sometimes even blunt to the point of rudeness. Over tea, Anna confessed how drained she had been feeling. Mara listened quietly, then set down her cup and said, "Anna, you think people love you because you're useful, but that's not love. That's dependence. Real love doesn't keep score. It doesn't vanish the moment you stop sacrificing." The words unsettled Anna. She had always believed that her sacrifices were proof of love, that without them, people would drift away. Mara leaned closer, her voice steady. "You can't pour from an empty cup. You've been trying to give what you don't even have. That's why you feel so hollow." That night, Anna went home and sat at her desk with a blank sheet of paper. At the top, she wrote one question. "What do I want?" It was startling how difficult it was to answer. For so long, her wants had been buried under the demands of others. Slowly, she wrote rest, time to read, to travel, to paint again, to not always be needed. The list grew, and with each word, she felt a mixture of grief and hope. Grief for the years she had lost. Hope for the possibility that it wasn't too late to reclaim them. But change never comes without resistance. When Anna began to set boundaries, the people around her did not understand. At work, when she declined to stay late for the third time that week, her manager frowned. "That's not like you, Anna," he said, as if her identity belonged to him. When she told her family she could not host every holiday, they reacted with disappointment, some even accusing her of being selfish. These reactions shook her, stirring guilt so powerful it nearly pulled her back into her old patterns. Yet something inside her had shifted. She remembered Mara's words, and she began to see the truth. The discomfort of others did not mean she was wrong. It meant she was changing. For the first time, she chose not to bend. She chose to endure their disappointment rather than abandon herself again. This was not easy. It felt like walking a tightrope without a net. But with each small act of resistance, Anna felt a spark of strength returning. Jung would have called this the process of individuation, the painful but necessary path of becoming whole. It requires us to integrate the shadow, to accept that we are not only kind but also angry, not only giving but also needy, not only light but also dark. For Anna, individuation meant discovering that she could love others without erasing herself, that she could be generous without being consumed. Her journey took on a rhythm. She began therapy, where she explored the origins of her compulsion to give. She remembered childhood moments when affection seemed conditional, when praise came only after she performed or helped. She realized she had carried that lesson into adulthood, that to be loved she had to earn it. In therapy, she confronted the pain of that belief and slowly began to unlearn it. She also started making time for herself. At 7 a.m., instead of checking messages or rushing into tasks, she painted for 30 minutes, letting colors spill onto the canvas without judgment. On weekends, she turned off her phone and took long walks in the park, rediscovering the simple pleasure of solitude. These small acts of reclaiming herself felt radical, like pieces of her true identity rising to the surface after being buried for years. Still, there were moments of doubt. One evening, after refusing a request from a colleague, Anna cried herself to sleep, convinced she was becoming cruel. But the next morning, when she woke up rested and calm, she realized something profound. Her refusal had harmed no one. In fact, it had protected her. That was when she understood that self-preservation was not selfishness, it was survival. Her life was not transformed overnight. The road ahead was long, filled with setbacks and difficult conversations. But for the first time, Anna felt she was no longer living as a ghost in her own story. She was learning to stand in the uncomfortable but liberating space between who she had been and who she was becoming. And in that space, she began to glimpse a new kind of success. One rooted not in endless sacrifice, but in authenticity, balance, and truth. Months passed, and Anna's transformation began to ripple into every part of her life. She noticed subtle changes first, the kind only she could feel. When her phone rang with yet another request for help, she no longer felt the reflexive tug of guilt. Instead, she paused, asked herself if she truly wanted to give her time, and if the answer was no, she allowed herself to decline. It was strange how much power lived in that single word, no. For years it had seemed impossible, almost forbidden. Now every time she spoke it with intention, she felt stronger, as if reclaiming a piece of her soul. Yet strength often attracts resistance, and not everyone welcomed this new version of Anna. At family gatherings, her mother would sigh and say, "You've changed. Anna, you used to be so accommodating." Some friends grew distant, unsettled by her refusal to be endlessly available. One even accused her of forgetting where she came from. These words stung, for Anna still loved them all deeply. But she was beginning to recognize that love without boundaries is not love, it is servitude. She would not return to being a servant of everyone's needs. Her work life mirrored this struggle. For years, Anna had been the silent backbone of her department, taking on extra projects, covering for colleagues, and staying late into the night. But when promotions came, she was overlooked, her efforts swallowed by the shadows. One evening, after yet another younger colleague was praised while her contributions went unmentioned, Anna walked home under the cold glow of streetlights and asked herself why she was still enduring it. That night she updated her resume, something she had not done in years. The following weeks were filled with interviews. For the first time, Anna spoke openly about her achievements, refusing to downplay her value. She was surprised to find that people listened, impressed not only with her skills but with the quiet confidence she now carried. Within 2 months, she was offered a position at a new company, with better pay, better hours, and most importantly, a culture that valued boundaries. Accepting the job felt like more than a career move. It was a declaration to herself that she deserved respect. But Anna's journey was not only external. Inside, she was undergoing what Jung might describe as a dialogue with her shadow. Dreams began to stir at night, vivid and unsettling. In one dream, she wandered through a forest where wolves circled her, their eyes glowing in the dark. At first, she was terrified, running from them until she collapsed. But in later dreams, she stopped running. She faced the wolves, and instead of attacking, they surrounded her protectively, guiding her deeper into the forest. Her therapist explained that the wolves symbolized the parts of herself she had feared: her anger, her selfishness, her hunger for freedom. By facing them, she was learning to harness their power rather than suppress it. These dreams gave Anna courage in waking life. She began speaking more honestly, not only when setting boundaries but also in her relationships. With Mara, she admitted how afraid she had been of losing people if she stopped giving. With her brother, she confessed how exhausted she had felt during years of silence. Some conversations brought tears, others brought healing. Her brother, to her surprise, thanked her for finally speaking up that night at dinner. "I didn't realize how much we leaned on you," he admitted. "You deserve to rest too." Still, not everyone accepted the new Anna. One longtime friend, unable to adjust, drifted away entirely. At first, Anna grieved the loss, questioning if she had made the right choice. But with time, she realized that some relationships survive only under old dynamics. And when those dynamics shift, the bond cannot hold. It hurt, but it was also liberating. She no longer wanted love that depended on her self-erasure. By now, her daily life looked very different. She woke up at 6:30 a.m., not to check her phone or respond to messages, but to spend quiet time journaling. She wrote about her dreams, her fears, her hopes. At work, she left on time, sometimes even early, unapologetically walking out the door while others lingered. She began traveling on weekends, something she had always postponed for the sake of others' needs. Standing on a mountain trail one Saturday afternoon, the wind in her hair and the horizon stretched before her, Anna felt a deep sense of belonging, not to others, but to herself. Yet the journey was not without shadows. There were days when guilt returned like an old ghost, whispering that she was abandoning people. On such days, she would sit quietly and remind herself of the truth. She was not abandoning anyone. She was simply including herself for the first time. Slowly, she learned to see guilt not as proof she was wrong, but as evidence she was changing. In moments of reflection, Anna realized how much of her life had been driven by fear, the fear of rejection, of conflict, of being unloved. It was this fear that had made her a chronic giver. But now she saw that love rooted in fear is not love at all. Real connection comes from freedom, from being fully seen and accepted. She was learning, piece by piece, to offer that freedom to herself first. By embracing both her light and her shadow, Anna had stepped into a more authentic version of herself. She was no longer just the giver, nor just the one who set boundaries, but a woman learning to live in balance. And as her life shifted, so too did her vision of success. It was no longer about being admired or needed. Success, she realized, was the quiet joy of belonging to herself, while still being able to share that self with others. Seasons turned, and with each one, Anna found herself growing into this new life with greater ease. The once turbulent storms of guilt now arrived only as passing showers, reminders of where she had been, but no longer prisons holding her captive. She had learned to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to escape it, to let silence stretch in conversations without filling it with promises she could not keep. Where once her heart had raced at the thought of disappointing someone, now she felt steady, grounded, aware that her worth did not depend on endless giving. Her new job offered opportunities that Anna had never imagined possible. She was recognized not just for her diligence but for her leadership, and soon she was invited to head a project of significant scale. At the first meeting, as colleagues looked to her for direction, she felt a flicker of the old self-doubt. Could she guide them without falling into her past pattern of overextension? But she remembered the wolves in her dream, circling her with strength. She breathed deeply, spoke clearly, and for the first time in her career, led not as a servant but as a partner. Her team respected her decisiveness, and she discovered that authority built on boundaries was far more effective than authority built on sacrifice. Outside of work, Anna's relationships also evolved. With Mara, the connection deepened into a space of true reciprocity. They would meet for coffee on quiet Sunday mornings, laughing about trivial things and also exploring deeper questions. Mara confessed that Anna's changes had inspired her own small rebellions, saying no to overtime, reclaiming her weekends, and daring to rest without apology. Their friendship became a mirror, reflecting back the possibility of a life not defined by exhaustion. With her family, it was more complicated. Her mother continued to struggle, often clinging to the image of Anna as the ever-available daughter. There were tense moments, sharp words exchanged followed by silence. But slowly, even her mother began to soften, noticing that despite Anna's boundaries, she was still present, still loving, still her daughter. In time, the family began adjusting, recognizing that Anna's strength was not a rejection of them but a renewal of herself. It was during a quiet evening in early spring that Anna experienced a moment of clarity she would never forget. She was sitting by her apartment window, watching rain beat and race down the glass. The city below buzzed with lights and noise, but inside there was calm. She thought about the years she had lived as though her life belonged to everyone else, about the countless nights she had gone to bed drained and unseen. Then she thought about the woman she was now, stronger, freer, imperfect, but alive in ways she had never allowed herself to be. And in that stillness, a phrase rose to her mind. Wholeness is not about perfection, but about integration. She had integrated her shadow, embraced her voice, and in doing so reclaimed her life. Her dreams shifted too. No longer filled with wolves chasing her, they became landscapes of open fields, rivers flowing, skies wide and endless. In one dream, she stood at a crossroads where two paths diverged. One led back into the familiar darkness of endless obligation, the other stretched into an unknown horizon. Without hesitation, she chose the horizon. When she woke, she knew it was not just a dream but a reflection of her waking choice every day, to keep walking toward freedom no matter the cost. Anna also began to give differently. She no longer gave from compulsion or fear but from abundance. When she volunteered at a local community center teaching children how to read, she did so with joy, not obligation. The children's laughter filled her with a sense of meaning that no amount of overextension had ever brought. Giving, she realized, is most powerful when it flows from a full cup, not an empty one. Of course, there were still challenges. There were nights she lay awake, questioning if she had gone too far in protecting herself, if she was becoming selfish. But then she remembered her therapist's words. Self-care is not selfishness. It is sustainability. She carried those words like a compass, guiding her whenever doubt crept in. By the end of that year, Anna was no longer the same woman who had once felt invisible at her brother's birthday dinner. She had grown into someone who could stand in a room and be seen, not because she was louder or harsher, but because she was whole. She knew now that respect begins with the self, and that no one else could give it to her if she refused to give it to herself. The journey had been painful, filled with losses and uncomfortable reckonings. Yet standing on the other side, Anna would not trade it for anything. For she had learned the most profound truth of all, that freedom is not given, it is claimed. And once claimed, it transforms everything: work, family, friendship, and most of all, the quiet moments alone when the rain falls against the window and the heart finally feels at home. Time passed, and Anna often found herself reflecting on the winding road that had brought her here. It was not a straight path, nor an easy one. It was marked by tears shed in silence, friendships strained, family bonds tested, and countless nights of doubt. Yet every challenge had carried within it a seed of transformation. Looking back, she realized that betrayal, the very thing that had shattered her illusions, was also the spark that forced her to rebuild. Without it, she might never have questioned the patterns that had consumed her life. Without it, she might still be lost in the endless cycle of pleasing others, never once pausing to ask who she truly was. One evening, she sat across from Mara in their favorite cafe. The hum of conversations around them faded into the background as Mara leaned in and said, "You've changed, Anna. You're lighter now. Almost like you're finally breathing in your own skin." Anna smiled softly, stirred her tea, and replied, "It's strange. For years I thought freedom would mean running away from responsibility, but now I see it's not about running, it's about choosing. Choosing when to say yes, when to say no, and knowing both are acts of love if they come from truth." Mara nodded, her eyes glistening, and Anna felt a quiet sense of gratitude. The revolution in her life had not only reshaped her, but had rippled outward, touching others too. Her family slowly adapted as well. Her brother, who had once been the unwitting spark of her painful awakening, began to look at her differently. He confessed one evening that he admired her courage, admitting that he too often felt pressured to carry burdens he did not want. Her mother, though still hesitant at times, grew to accept Anna's new boundaries, realizing that love was not diminished by distance, but sometimes deepened by it. The family, imperfect as it was, found a new rhythm, one that did not demand Anna's constant sacrifice but instead honored her humanity. The culmination of this transformation came one late afternoon during a company conference. Anna stood before a hall of colleagues, delivering a presentation on leadership and resilience. Her words flowed with a confidence she had never imagined possessing. She spoke not from textbooks or borrowed philosophies, but from lived experience. The truth that strength is born not from pleasing everyone, but from knowing who you are and standing firm in it. When the audience rose in applause, Anna did not shrink back in disbelief. She received it fully, not because she needed their approval, but because she finally believed in herself. Later that night, alone in her apartment, she thought about the long arc of her journey. The betrayal that once felt like an ending had revealed itself as a beginning. The darkness that once suffocated her had become the soil from which new life grew. She realized that success was not defined by recognition, wealth, or status, but by the courage to live authentically. The hidden truth behind her success was not external at all. It was internal, born of pain, reflection, and the relentless choice to rise again. Her story, she knew, was not unique. Many lived in similar patterns of silence and self-erasure, waiting for permission to exist, and though Anna could not walk the journey for them, she could share her own. Perhaps in her story, someone else would find a spark of courage, a mirror that whispered, "You too can reclaim your voice." That thought filled her with quiet purpose. Years later, whenever Anna told her story, she always ended with the same reflection. Betrayal hurts because it forces us to see what we've ignored. But it also frees us. It tears down illusions and demands we choose ourselves. And when we do, the revolution begins, not in the world outside, but within. If you've stayed with Anna's journey until now, take a moment to reflect on your own. What boundaries do you need to draw? What truths are you afraid to speak? And what kind of life waits for you on the other side of that courage? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, subscribe for more stories like this, and leave a comment about the lesson that touched you most. Your voice matters just as Anna's did.